I believe that it was about 30 years ago when I first learned of Leigh's work, when I walked into your office and sought some advice. And it was a long time ago, so my association and understanding of some of what you do has some basis and growing respect over the years. I'm delighted to learn of the successes that you have achieved in fighting causes of justice for those who cannot. When institutions become mightier than the citizens, we have moral obligation to seek change and challenge them. It's been a long time since I've had the privilege of speaking about women's health rights. 1980 onwards, I lived, breathed, slept, woke up to perinatal and postnatal care, perinatal tear, IVF, cesarean section, and of course HIV and AIDS. Not because I was giving birth to 5 kids, but I was working as an advocate for women. Heyday of campaigns, marches, and great senses of assurance that activism, challenging institutions, occupying hospital boardrooms can instigate the desired change and get justice for women, and so change their outcome. The reason I'm speaking to you about some of the work that has occurred over the past years is because I've been asked to speak about some of my own personal work and in trying to change things to make it better. I've also been asked to say something about rights of women, minority women. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of glimpse of that trajectory of where I come from and where my activism lie. I'm speaking of the period where women received maternity support in the community, health visitors visited children and mothers for 6 weeks, and there were no pressure for immunization, and radical midwives had an amazing a time of campaign and advocating on women's rights. And of course, those of you are old enough, like I am, I'm 59, by the way, Wendy Savage campaign, with which we were very, very closely associated with, which I think formed and directed women's health rights in many, they formulated the basis on which we talk today. I'm not a lawyer or a doctor, therefore I'm speaking alone from very personal experiences and perspectives. More importantly, I'm reflecting back a small glimpse over decades of work with somewhat rose-tinted respect and none of the pain. I was also managing the Tower Hamlet advocacy service at that time, one of a handful of Asian women in the early 80s to manage a large women-led project. In fact, I think I was one of 2. At the same time, I was driven to return to study and obtain my qualifications with then 3 children on my side. I have now 5, just to assure you that it didn't scare me. So from 1980 onwards, I was responsible for leading in the development of a number of women's organizations created specifically to address the then persistent neglect of statutory institutions in their provisions for women's housing, training, education, and women fleeing violence. To widen the range of facilities available to women, 3 of us began to develop the first purpose-built women's-led education training center in the country called Jagonari, and East London Asian Family Counselling, which I set up as a social work student, began to provide support and counselling to those who fled violence and those who wish to remain and with their partner and work with their partners, perpetrators. During this period, I continued to support a number of women colleagues who developed the first advocacy service for women who experience FGM and cutting, or FGM cutting. Simultaneously, I'd also worked as a social worker, particularly responsible for working with difficult child protection issues of sexual abuse, incest, and domestic violence, with a specific interest within the minority communities. Talking about this development in the East London is making me somewhat dizzy, for surely it was a hopeful period in some real sense that on certain level we wielded significant influence and a force for change. We instigated many levels of strategies to tackle inequalities, racism, and Islamophobia, including challenging, creating pressure, partnering with the institution, and then sit on the decision-making table to see what was happening. We believed in the possibility of change. The astonishing cooperation and cohesion in the community would be more wistful thinking in today's generation. More recently, and I'm telling you, I was in my early 20s, most recently, I joined AdAction as the project director for Breaking the Cycle. It's a national project across 4 sites, including Scotland. The project was set up to work with 400 families where at least one parent was misusing drugs or alcohol. Domestic violence was a prevalent and significant factor in all those 400 households. In the early days, I was easily seen as the person to go to when the issues of minority women, first Asian and then eventually as political hurricane arrived, as someone to look to discuss Muslim women. Whilst at the local level, I was able to drive strategical and political policies and see the impact at community level, I struggled at the national level in the Lords to bring these policies of mundane matters, of economic challenges, education needs, and of women, or the necessity to make changes in the workplace for minority or Muslim women. National government was much more concerned and ready to highlight the problem as it assessed prevalent in minority communities. For example, forced marriage, domestic violence, and so-called honor killing, and of course, women's role in preventing extremism. I have to say that absolutely determined not to leave it to institution to come to their own usual stereotypical conclusion, I ensured that I was on the table to lead the conversation. I ensured that in the work of government, I could bring it as much as possible, leading women and organization into these discussions. Although when final outcome came, never seemed easier to manage and would often be lost through the milieu of civil service and government departments. A good example is People into Management Network, the first mentoring project, which was a prelude to the mentoring college set up for minority women, task force of ending forced marriage or community cohesion, etc. I was able to lead and formulate the government strategies with a large group of mostly women, which included representation of parliamentarian, grassroots women's organizations such as Southall Black Sisters, as well as government departments. Since 2012, I've been concentrating my activities within the House, particularly in the Chamber, as a member of Population Development and Reproductive Rights. It's a very powerful and influential group. I also work with Africa Group and Commonwealth, amongst others, speaking on issues affecting women nationally and internationally, with particular emphasis on women who have been raped in conflict and wars. My first experience of women surviving rape was as a witness to war in Bangladesh. Their cry for justice has never left my conscience, and ever since, eradicating violence against women is something I shout about whenever I get the opportunity. You may say some of what I've said just now is nostalgia past. I believe that all these situations are as prevalent today as they were in the 80s, 90s. The fundamental struggles for ordinary small NGOs have become more critical. Larger organizations have succumbed to becoming mini businesses to ensure they earn their budget. Services for women at the coalface, those ordinary women in all sections of the communities, particularly British women of minority heritage, have become much more alienated from the mainstream. Accessing services remain a huge lottery and funding a fraction of what was available. And I do think that there's a correlation between then and now, and the correlation is very simple, that inequality prevails and social injustice prevails. We are speaking of political muscle. In a political and social strategies, and certainly not for the masses, the minority women, then 30, 40, 50 years ago, and now still well out of reach of equality. I brought all these experiences to the appointed House of Lords, continue to combine part-time professional work with my commitment to the role as a legislator, where I persisted with the issue of violence against women and girls. I do sincerely believe, whilst House of Lords has been a great platform for discussion and debate, as one member, I have done too little to impact social or political change. I'm very honest about that. I have not felt as though I've been able to move or shake government in the way to shape our country or society. I have long felt any such ambitions, I've long left any such ambitions held at the age of 16, that when I felt that if I only could find a babysitter, I would change the entire world. Well, that never happened. Instead, I reasserted my belief, and misled by Voltaire at the age of 21, then I thought, okay, it is dangerous to be right when those in power are wrong. So I tried to kind of prove that constantly. It's a great source of energy, I have to tell you that. There is so much to do, as there was when I began my work as an activist all those years ago. And I stand tall today on the work of the many women activists. I'm sure there are many amongst you today, although most of you look years younger than I am. But anyway, keep on going. So I think that, there are these women who played a critical role to change our communities and ghettos to a yuppie land, to the current very trendy Shoreditch. Anyway, we were together to bring about many of the radical changes to shape our community and our area. I believe many of our experiences have been lost amidst those who write up community history, including how Shoreditch have become so trendy. These days, I carry on a day at a time and a woman at a time, and hope that this is a good enough legacy for my conscience to live with, to know that I do best I can. And thank you very much for listening to me.